Part 3. For the past month or so, Philip felt that he was one of the luckiest men in the kingdom. He was arguably the luckiest of such men, if he did say so himself. However, modesty was a virtue. Besides, there might be other nobles luckier than himself, so it would be best not to speak in absolutes. Nobles, huh? Philip tightened up his smile while smoothing out his clothes. This was only the second time he had participated in a noble party like this. Still, perhaps he should say that this was expected of a dinner party organized by the royal family. The sheer decadence of this event outshone the one he had previously attended. The formal attire of the other guests seemed much more costly than the ones at the earlier party. How much did their outfits cost, anyway? Philip glanced at his own clothes, and began to feel a little frustrated. As he thought, the upper-class nobles had really awesome clothes. The noble women in their fancy dresses all had smiles on their faces, but were those smiles mocking him for his plain attire? Philip could not help but think that way, even without any basis for such assumptions. When he looked around, he imagined all the surrounding nobles laughing at him. "It's all because I have no money." If his domain was wealthier, he would have been able to afford better clothes. However, Philip's domain had never been prosperous to begin with. Even his clothes now had been hastily stitched together from his older brother's formal wear. As a result, they still felt a little tight around the shoulders. Well, money's scarce because the family heads until now were useless. So once I become the next head, I'll make my domain wealthier. Philip was born the third son of a noble family. Similar to commoners, third sons were not individuals who were particularly welcome in noble families. No matter how rich a family was, splitting its assets multiple ways would ultimately weaken it. Therefore, it was all inherited by the eldest son. In this respect, the nobles followed the same basic principle as the commoners. Perhaps a wealthier family might have been able to give a third son some financial support. Perhaps they could count on connections to other noble families and foster him out. However, this was not the case for Philip's family. Once the eldest son came of age, in other words, when the chances of him dying of disease were greatly decreased, the third son Philip was no longer necessary to his family. Would he be given a bit of money and then chased out of the family home? Or perhaps he would be sent to live with a poor family and work like a peasant. He could only see tragedy waiting in both options. Yet, things had not unfolded that way. Instead, he was making his debut at a grand society ball. That was why Philip felt he was lucky. The first bit of luck was his elder brother, the second son, dying of illness before he came of age. Since his eldest brother, the first son, was already a man by then, there was no longer any value to his elder brother, the second son. In addition, theirs was not a wealthy fief, and they could only use herbs instead of priests to treat him. In the end, his condition had taken a turn for the worse, and he shuffled off the mortal coil. At this point, Philip was now elevated to the position of a spare. His value had risen from that of a farmer to that of a butler. Things like these were not uncommon. However, what had catapulted Philip into the upper crust was the result of Philip's next stroke of luck. Several years after reaching adulthood, it was time for Philip's elder brother to take over the family estate. Then, that war with the Empire had broken out. If it had been like previous years, it should have ended after a few bumps and scrapes. Therefore, it was a safe way for his elder brother to obtain the battle record, and his family could take pride in the fact that they had pledged men to the battle. However, his elder brother had not come back. He had been consumed by the Saucer King's magic, and perished with the 20 peasants that went with him. Philip could not forget the instant of joy he felt when he heard that news. It was the joy he had carried within him ever since becoming a spare. His elder brother's body was missing, and so was the suit of full-plate armor passed down from his ancestors. Still, that was not a big problem. Once his domain grew wealthier, he would make a better suit of armor for himself. The more important thing was that the title of estate heir had gone from unattainable to practically his. The timing for that was perfect. If his brother had died after inheriting the family estate, Philip would have had to spend his time waiting for his nephew to grow into a man. However, since his brother had died without claiming his inheritance, his lordship was a done deal. It was as though the Saucer King had gone out of his way to arrange all this for Philip. Because of that, Philip even felt something like goodwill toward the Saucer King that he had never met before. If only he could convey his gratitude directly to the Saucer King's emissary. In addition, that's right. I'm going to ride on my streak of luck. How can I let such a good chance get away before my eyes? Philip's heart blazed like a bonfire. He could only think of his father and elder brother as idiots after seeing what they had been doing all this time. Why don't you do this? Doesn't this bring you more benefits? Of course, he never told him that to their faces. That was because none of the gains made would trickle down to him. Neither would any prestige for doing so be his. Therefore, over a long time, Philip had cooked up ideas on how to properly administer his fief and stordom in his heart. I will let the nearby lords know that I am the one who deserves this title. I will let father know how poor his taste was in choosing Nissan. Selling the good quality wheat and vegetables to those traders. No, what should I do? That would draw too much attention, and what if my revolutionary proposal was stolen by others? Still, there's no money without trade. I need to find tight-lipped and reliable merchants, in other words, not that guy. Philip's face twisted as he recalled the face of that merchant. The unpleasant memory of that man overcame his joy at being able to stand in this lavish hall. How dare he look down on me? Although I have to bear it for now, once I find a better merchant in the royal capital, I'll boot him away. I've already got connections of my own. Philip had already found his own underground connections during his few weeks in the royal capital. His pride at this chased away the unhappiness in his heart. As expected of me, I've already got my path all mapped out. I'll make my domain rich and obtain a huge fortune. Those idiots who looked down on me will see who's the true idiot now. Just as Philip was envisioning his glorious golden future, a male voice rang through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the leader of the envoys from the Sorceress Kingdom, Albedo-sama. At this moment, the Grand Hall's orchestra lowered their instruments, and the mood of joviality in the air died down. Judging by the noises, it would seem the Master of Ceremonies had just announced the star of the dinner party which the royal family was hosting. Albedo-sama serves as the right hand of His Majesty the Saucer King in the Sorceress Kingdom, and commands a position equivalent to that of a Prime Minister as a guardian overseer. Albedo-sama will grace us alone this evening. A soft woman's voice said. Huh? Alone? A wealthy-looking noble standing nearby chastised her with the quiet, you. Philip felt a little surprised at this. Combing by oneself is all well and good. But to think someone like that would serve as an emissary. Does the Sorceress Kingdom truly have such high hopes for the kingdom? As Philip wondered what sort of man this emissary would turn out to be, he looked toward the doors by which the Master of Ceremonies was standing. Then, let us welcome the leader of the envoys, Albedo-sama. As the great doors opened, the entire hall fell silent. A goddess-like woman stood there. Her perfect features were more beautiful than any peasant, more beautiful than any whore in the kingdom's brothels, more beautiful than any woman Philip had ever seen in his life. Of course, the princess from earlier was pretty, but Philip preferred what he was seeing now. Her clothes were beautiful as well. Her platinum dress was accented with golden hair ornaments, while the lower half of her dress was covered by what seemed like black feathered wings. Her reflection in the magical lights above made it seem as though she was glowing. Philip looked at the woman who had spoken earlier. She was standing in place with a retarded look on her face. What's this? What's this? Is this the sort of face the companion of some big-name noble ought to have? You look just like a roadside peasant. The elation he felt at the Sorceress Kingdom's triumph, to which he was favorably inclined, made the joy of victory surge up in his heart. We welcome your presence, Albedo Dono. Ranpasa III rose to welcome Albedo. Your Majesty, I am grateful for this reception. Philip could only see a side of Albedo's face, but when he saw Albedo's tender smile, he was acutely aware of one thing. She's beautiful beyond words. I do hope you will forgive me for taking a seat, due to my age. Then, nobles of the kingdom, our main guest has arrived. Tonight, please enjoy yourselves to your heart's content. Then, Albedo Dono, I hope you will enjoy yourself as well. My thanks, Your Majesty. A sweet smile bloomed on Albedo's face. He snuck a peek at that noblewoman from earlier, and saw that she was mumbling something about she didn't lower her head, or something along those lines. Philip cast aside that foolish woman and her foolish words and instead feasted his eyes on that world-class beauty. He burned the image of her speaking closely with Princess Rena into his eyes. If only I could make that woman mine. He understood that it would be a very difficult task. However, when one thought about it, it was not completely impossible. Once my fief becomes wealthy, the other nobles will start introducing their daughters to me. The wealthier I get, the better the girls will be. Even that princess, even that emissary isn't out of the question. Philip felt a wave of heat surge up from his lower body. Well, the great nobles usually have a concubine or three. The best case would be if I could enjoy those two beauties at the same time. Philip looked back and forth between Rena and Albedo. Philip hurriedly picked up a beverage from nearby before his fantasies grew out of control. It would be very bad if he got hard here. The cool sensation of the drink sliding down his throat helped him regain a measure of calm. Come to think of it, how did they make this ice? Is it magic? The only people in Philip's estate who could use magic were the priests. While they could help cure illness, they would demand money for doing so. They would ask for an appropriate payment if they had to make ice. Since they're in my domain, I'll have them heal me for free next time. A mere resident daring to charge his lord money, how ridiculous is that? Philip made a mental note of this new way to deal with the priests in future. He looked forward to getting to work on his domain once he returned. He could imagine all his brilliant ideas being put into action, lighting up his life with golden radiance. Oya. When he looked back to Albedo, he saw her standing by herself. There were many nobles around, but nobody knew how to approach her. The Sorceress Kingdom, huh? What will become of the kingdom after this? Philip did not particularly care what happened to the kingdom, but it would be troublesome if it affected his estate. That being the case, Philip shuddered at the idea he had just had. Oi, don't think about such dangerous things. It's just, well, it's not exactly a bad move, right? How should I say this? I can't believe I actually thought of an idea like that. He looked at the side of Albedo's lonely face. There's no use in being third. There's no point in being second. The most important thing is to be the first. The emissary of the Sorceress Kingdom looked like she had been outcast because nobody was talking to her. Philip had read about how ladies were quite vulnerable to this sort of thing. Do it. You have to make a gamble to get a return. The chance to rise has come because everything has changed. I'm a lucky man, so I should make good use of my luck. Philip's family had always been bound to a faction, but they were typically at the tail end of that faction. There were only so many benefits he could gain from continuing to be bound to that faction. Then, he recalled some words he had heard recently. A certain very skinny landlady had said, "Why not make a faction of your own?" After making up his mind, Philip downed the glass of wine he had been holding all this while. It was unlike the watery wine he had drunk at home. It felt like his throat and belly were burning. As though propelled by the heat which rose from his belly, Philip stepped forward. "Albedo-sama, mind if I cut in?" Thanks to his voice, Albedo turned her smile to him. He was not just blushing because of the wine. "Ara, how do you do?" Her brows creased for a moment, as though deep in thought. Philip immediately realized what she was looking for. "I am Philip." "Oh. Lord Philip." "No, Philip-sama. It is an honor to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine, Albedo-sama. Nothing could delight me more than to make your acquaintance." Philip was keenly aware that the air around him seemed to have changed. A quick glance aside revealed that the higher-ranked nobles had shocked looks on their faces. He could not stem the joy within him as he realized all eyes at the dinner party sponsored by the royal family were on him. I'm now the center of attention. To think that he, who had only eaten cold meals in the past, was now the focus of these people who stood at the pinnacle of the kingdom. As he thought about this, an unexpected excitement took control of Philip. "That's right. I'm Philip. Watch me. Watch the man who will be the central figure of the kingdom." Philip racked his brains, and then made the biggest bet in his life. That was to say, he invited Albedo to a ball which would take place a couple of days later. "You moron." That rebuke extinguished Philip's excitement. Yet, at the same time, it lit a flame within his heart. It was a fire that seemed to consume all the fuel Philip had hidden within his heart his entire life. Philip looked disdainfully at the white-haired man before him. "I didn't send you there for that sort of thing. You imbecile." Philip sighed as his father asked him about the dinner at the royal palace. In the first place, that invitation to that dinner party organized by the royal family would never have come to our house. I worked my fingers to the bone to secure it so you could express your gratitude to the count and to the other nobles while you made yourself known to them. The royal family's dinner party gathered people from both factions. When this happened, the fact that the head of a family had changed would probably not come up. Thus, nobody would pay too much attention to that fact and he would be readily accepted by others. After that, once they had tacitly acknowledged him, it would be quite difficult for them to protest that fact. In other words, Philip's father had no faith in his abilities at all. He felt that if he had tried to introduce himself to the other members of his faction in the normal manner, he would mess something up. As Philip realized this, he strove to suppress the annoyance within him, and put on a fake smile. No, father. Don't get so worked up. I was doing this for our house." "What do you mean, our house? What you've done is completely absurd." What did he mean, absurd? Philip griped in his heart. Everyone else was a coward without the courage to make a move, so why should he not take the first step? Was he supposed to pretend to be polite to all those incompetent cowards and remain in this pathetic place for the rest of his life? "Father, think a little. Although the road joining the Sorceress Kingdom and the kingdom is quite long, our domain lies on the middle of it. If the Sorceress Kingdom makes war on the kingdom, we'll definitely be drawn into the mess. Therefore, we should forge good relations with the Sorceress Kingdom, shouldn't we?" You idiot. His father's face was even redder than before. Those bastards from the Sorceress Kingdom killed your brother, and you want to work with them. Isn't that treason against the kingdom? So what? Philip thought. Since the Sorceress Kingdom was stronger, what was wrong with betraying the kingdom? All he needed to do was pledge his fealty to the Sorceress Kingdom. What was wrong with the weak following the strong? Who had the right to reproach him for that? What on earth are you thinking? Philip could not help but feel frustrated at his father's foolishness. The fact that he actually had to explain such self-evident things struck him as terribly stupid. Still, it had to be said. It's simple, father. This is for M. He swallowed the word "may" the moment he thought of it. Sooner or later it would be true, but for now, it was not entirely his. Our domain. It's to protect our serfs. The Sorceress Kingdom is overwhelmingly powerful. More so than the kingdom. That being the case, it would hardly be strange if they attacked the kingdom. This is a way out for when that time comes. Che. What do you mean, way out? What do you think the surrounding lords will think when they hear about what you've done? They won't come and attack us, not in this day and age. Many people within Philip's domain had died because of that battle. The same applied to the surrounding estates. Therefore, they would not have the excess strength need to attack Philip's domain. Did you consider anything else? Huh. Philip replied. He had no idea what his father was getting at. That's why I say your thinking is shallow. You're acting as though your daydreams are already reality. This is. I think you should stop there for now, interrupted the man who had been standing behind his father all this time. He was the butler who had attended his father all this time. Philip disliked that man, who was the type that never let anyone see his feelings. He was one of the people Philip intended to chase out after he had solidified his position as the family heir. His father worked to get his breathing under control once he heard the butler's words. The red in his face wrecked, leaving a pale, anemic face. Ha, ha, Philip, I have a question for you. Are you not afraid of making enemies of the surrounding nobles? Then nothing to be scared of, no. His father rounded his shoulders in disappointment. That response sparked frustration and unease within Philip. Had he missed out something? Still, he could not think of what that might be. Many young men died in the Battle of the Katsa Plains. This will lead to all sorts of problems within the next few years. Therefore, the surrounding nobles will need to work closely together in a cooperative relationship. This domain will produce food, that domain will weave clothing. Nobody's estate is large enough to be self-sufficient, nor do we have much money left over. Under these circumstances, who will help a family that actively courts the Sorceress Kingdom's favor? Cold sweat broke out on Philip's back. His father had a point. You know that too, right? Our domain does not produce anything the others do not, we have no unique exports. Therefore, they will have no problem with kicking us out of their cooperative. Philip racked his brains. He had a good head on his shoulders. He should be able to refute in any number of his stupid father's assertions. That's why we have to rely on the Sorceress Kingdom, father. His father bade him to continue. Once we build ties with the Sorceress Kingdom, we'll just have them support us. Then let me ask you something. If you were someone from the Sorceress Kingdom, no, if you were the king of a certain country, and a village from a country that you were at war with asked you for food, would you give it to them? Of course. If it was me, I would definitely do so. Why is that? Isn't that obvious? By doing so, I'll show everyone that I'm a merciful ruler. Apart from that, nothing else. His father's jaw dropped. He must have been impressed. Still, that sort of reaction was quite strange. After all, the Sorcerer King would surely want to be known as a kind ruler, particularly since the Sorceress Kingdom had been founded on Erantal and the area surrounding that city. He would surely make some concessions to quiet him. Is that so? So that's what you were thinking? Well, if it were me, I would surely send aid as well, in order to create a casus belli to invade the other country. After that, I would declare war on the kingdom, under the pretext of liberating that village which the kingdom was oppressing. Impossible. It's fanciful thinking. Besides, that sort of cause won't work at all. Really now, and why do you think it's impossible? Let's back up a bit here. Let's assume it's really as you say, Father. Isn't that more of a reason to deepen our relationship with the Sorceress Kingdom? His father was at a loss for words. Have you no pride at all as a nobleman of the kingdom? Of course I do. However, it would be better not to have it than be destroyed, no? That's the Demon King who slew your brother and countless people of the kingdom with frightening magic, no? This is the king you're going to support. That was war, Father. What difference does it make if they died to swords or spells? Why is it that you have so much trust in the king of the Sorceress Kingdom? That was not trust, though there was some goodwill there. More importantly, they were all just pawns for Philip to play in order to improve his lot in life. A pawn. That's right. To me, even the Sorcerer King of the Sorceress Kingdom, who is feared by all the people of the kingdom, is little more than a pawn in my hand. Philip grew excited as he imagined himself playing a massive, on the scale of nations, game of chess. Still, it's only natural that Father would be worried. That said, if I can rebutter him so easily, it just means that's all there is to him. Although, it might be best to discuss the matter with Albedo-sama the next time we meet. I tire of this. Did you thank the Count for the dinner party? I'm asking about whether he acknowledged you as the new family head. That was the one thing Philip could not accept. Even if he was the head of the faction, why did he have to bow his head to a count who was nothing more than an outsider? It was the family head's prerogative to decide who the next leader of the family would be. It had nothing to do with that count. Now, perhaps if the count had backed him when his brother was around and he was still a third son, leading to him becoming the heir, he might have been grateful for that. However, that was not the case. Philip had achieved his current position entirely through his own luck. In other words, there was no reason to bow and scrape to him. Therefore, Philip had not gone before the count to lower his head and offer his thanks. However, if he said that, his father would probably get agitated again. This was a lie for the sake of his father's health. Of course. I see. That's good. Since you've done that, there ought to be a way. When the time comes, all you have to do is ask the Count for help. With that done with, just as Philip was beginning to feel at ease, the butler interrupted again from behind. There is one more problem. The matter Philip-sama mentioned at the beginning has not yet been resolved. Philip-sama said he was inviting the emissary of the Sorceress Kingdom to a ball organized by this family. What shall we do about that? That's right, Philip. What were you thinking? Our family doesn't have a place to host a ball. All landlords had an estate in the royal capital. There were small mansions set aside for their visits to the capital. Of course, they were not as tiny as commoners' homes. They might only be used a handful of times a year, but they were also a sign of the nobility's power. Therefore, they had to be large enough to accommodate the entourage the lords brought with them. However, they were not much larger than that, and the interior was not large enough for a ball. Still, that problem had already been dealt with. It's fine. It's true that our estate cannot host such an event, but I've already managed to rent another place. Oh, could it be the Count? Philip shook his head at the faint flowering of joy on his father's face. No, it's a place belonging to someone I know in the royal capital. The landlady there said she could loan it to me. The fact was, I spoke with her before I came back, and she assured me that it would be fine. And what will we have to pay for it? Philip sighed internally at the butler's question. So that's the first thing he asks, huh? It's free of charge. Free of charge, you say? Is that even possible? Yes. The words of the landlady came to Philip's mind. I have high hopes for your future, so I'll invest in you. However, I hope you'll return my kindness in the future. I do not believe such good fortune would fall upon you just like that. Could you have been deceived? Anger blazed up within Philip, but he knew that his father trusted the butler implicitly, so he could not rebuke him just yet. I owe a favor, but since I promised to return that favor, it will be fine. So that's the venue taken care of, but how about the invitations? Shall we have the Count send them out? What is he saying? Philip thought. This event was being run by his family to raise their reputation. Why, after putting in all that hard work and preparation, did he have to hand over the most beneficial part of that to others? So that's his slave mentality talking. How sad. I don't want to end up like him. It'll be fine. I've asked the landlady who lent me the venue to help me with the preparation work. Of course, I will decide the guest list. Still, it would be quite rude not to let the Count vet them. It's not too late to ask the Count for help now. In addition, do you really know which families to invite which won't cause offense? I do, to some extent, and intend to invite some special people this time. The landlady has already given me their names. Doubt appeared in his father's eyes. Have you been manipulated by that landlady's words? Father, how can you say that? I came up with this and made it happen. It's true that I had to borrow some help to do it. But that landlady agreed that my plan had merits after she heard it, which means that she saw that my plan could succeed, and she felt that I could pay the appropriate price. What have you been thinking all this while? Under normal circumstances, you should be giving me your full support as the next head of the family. That much was true. The landlady had said, I will gladly help you if you will allow several nobles close to me to take part. Quote, it was because both of them had a mutually beneficial relationship that he had gone to her for help. He was definitely not being manipulated. She was completely different from that Count who controlled his father, stole all the gains away, and left him with nothing. You're the one who's being controlled, Philip wanted to say. Forgive me, but can you tell me the name of that landlady? Philip suppressed his anger. After all, he was talking to someone who had not yet shared his nature as a slave. He had to open up his heart and take all this in stride. Her name is Hilma Signius. Have you heard that name before? No, I've never heard of her before. How about you? The butler shook his head. Philip was proud that he had managed to acquaint himself with someone that even his father, who had long immersed himself in noble society, did not know. I will get the landlady's opinion on the matter of the Count. It might be troublesome to bypass her and ask the Count for help instead. Is there anything else, father? His exhausted father had no response to this. Though he was still a little unsatisfied, Philip began putting his plan into motion. The next step was sending an invitation to the emissary of the Sorceress Kingdom, Miss Albedo, and then thinking about how to consolidate his position from there.